Not mine.
So thank you, everyone, for coming. This is a great turnout. I'm assuming it's because of the man standing to my left, who really needs no introduction, I guess. But I was told that he was the very first speaker for our Arboretum series 20 plus years ago. And he holds a special place in our hearts. We're glad he's back, and I will let him introduce himself.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm Matt Perry. I'm a conservation director at Spring Farm Cares Nature Sanctuary. We have a 260-acre nature preserve, which I've been developing as essentially rewilding for the past 25 years, trying to turn it into diverse bird and other wildlife habitat. I'm also the co-founder and president of the Utica Peregrine Falcon Project, which I think some of you have probably heard of, and incoming president of a group called Beavers, Wetlands and Wildlife, which is an advocacy group for beavers and for all the good works that beavers do, creating habitat across the state and across the country and even in other countries. So I want to talk to you today about birds and bird habitat. So let's, yeah.
Might make sure the mic is.
Oh, I thought I turned that on. No. So I have to be right on the mic, apparently. Okay. Does everyone hear me okay? Even the little
Yes.
folks? Wow. Where'd that voice come from? Okay. So if you were to come here to this area 240 years ago, you would have found a very different place. You would have found almost unbroken forest land. And this forest had a certain character. It was what we refer to as climax forest or old growth forest. And forest of that nature attracts a certain set of wildlife as well as flora. And so imagine a land like that with pretty much unbroken forest land and pretty much unbroken forest type ecology catering to wildlife. If you look at the forest structure of a mature forest, it looks quite different than a lot of the woodlots and forests you see in the region. You have a well-developed forest understory. That means lower trees, a shrub layer. You have complicated microtopography. The forest floor undulates. It's almost like waves on an ocean. It's called pit and mound. You also have dead, decaying logs. You have niches all over the place for wildlife and for, in terms of birds, for bird prey, as well as for the birds themselves. You also have the canopy, which is more complicated. This isn't the canopy yet in this picture, but this shows a diversity of ages of trees, which is a characteristic of mature forests. You don't have just one uniform age or just maybe a handful of tree species. You have a diverse range of tree species. So it's a forest that has a very different character than probably 99% of the forests we see in the region. And as I was saying before, the canopy of the forest is also relatively complicated. You have different layers in the canopy. Sometimes you have what's called a closed canopy, which most of the mature / old growth forest would have had. It would have been a closed canopy forest as opposed to open canopy, which happens when you selectively log, say, or thin a forest. This original forest was subject to disturbance factors, and these disturbance factors created clearings. And the clearings they catered to different species that wouldn't nest in the forest. In terms of birds, we're talking. What caused these disturbance factors? Blowdowns, heavy snow, a day like today, we could imagine a blowdown taking place. But also floods, Fires would also cause disturbance factors. And one very interesting component of the forest of long ago was the passenger pigeon. The passenger pigeon was once the most common bird in the world, estimated, with flocks that would sometimes reach into the billions. These birds nested in central New York too, and when they did nest, they would nest in an area that was miles long and sometimes like a half a mile wide. They were colonial nesters, so they would pile into the trees to nest. And just them being in the trees would, and their waste would often kill a large amount of the trees they nested in. So this was a very serious disturbance factor that they would create in the old forest. Unfortunately, we don't have passenger pigeons with us today. The last one died, I think, in the Cincinnati Zoo in 1915, I think it was. They were effectively gone from the wild before the advent of the 20th century, though, and they died because they were shot and they were used for market purposes as well as just shot as pests because, you know, they would land in farmers' fields and pretty much eat everything in the field. They were also trapped and put in barrels, and the barrels would be shipped to the cities and shipped to the South where they would be used as slave rations. So passenger pigeons also were a very important component of the food chain. A lot of the raptors, meaning the hawks and the owls that we have that are native species here, were dependent on passenger pigeon populations to feed themselves. And we see a lot of the raptors like the Cooper's hawk, the sharp-shinned hawk, the merlin, the peregrine falcon. They're about the right size to prey on a passenger pigeon, which was a little bit bigger than a mourning dove, just for relation. Okay, moving on from the passenger pigeon, another disturbance factor was created by these cutie pies. These are beavers, and beavers were once immensely common in the United States, with populations estimates ranging from 60 to 400 million in the US. These guys created ponds and wetlands and very complicated wetland systems, which not only was it a disturbance factor, but beavers are known as a keystone species. And when they create habitat, it brings in all these species that require that wetland ecology to breed in. But beavers also go onto land and they log. They take trees from an area and then leave a clearing. So a lot of birds and other wildlife were dependent on the clearings that beavers made. When beavers are done with their ponds too, those ponds turn into what's called beaver meadows, which are very rich habitats as well. So beavers, very significant operators when it comes to creating habitat. Here's a look at a beaver pond. Just so you know too, before the colonization of this area, beavers were trapped out and their ponds disappeared pretty fast. Other wetlands were drained for agricultural purposes. So things changed pretty radically, but we see beavers coming back now, and the estimated population of beavers now is about 15 million in the country. And this is providing a lot of not just breeding habitat, but migratory stopover habitat for scores of animals. This is an artist's rendition of what it looked like when the original forest was taken down. It was taken down in a very homespun kind of way with just chopping the trees down and burning them. They didn't really have the ability to ship the trees to market. So that original forest fell in favor of pasture land and agricultural fields. It fell in little more than a generation, which is an amazing accomplishment. I mean, in terms of somebody that advocates for birds and birds habitat, it wasn't a great accomplishment, but you could still appreciate that they were able to do it. But what happened is you transform this incredible forest into what? Something that resembles grasslands. And how did this affect the mostly woodland bird species that bred here. Probably not very well. They could no longer breed here. So you had a whole different set of species which came in mostly from the west to take advantage of the grassland habitat that now existed here. Of course, there were better places for farmers to go. So a lot of the farmers that were farming in central New York moved to the Midwest when that opened up. And so a lot of their farm fields reverted to forests, but these forests were second and third growth forests. They did not have the character of the forest I was showing you before, the old growth. You don't have the structure, you don't have the understory, and you don't have the tree diversity. And these forests like this, and they're mostly woodlots that occur, between fields. These do not host a great number of species. So even though it looks superficially like a forest by any other name, it's quite different in character and what it hosts. Now, we do have some healthy forest land around, some mature forest, and you folks have some right here, the Kirkland Woods. It's probably the most important piece of forest in this part of the county. So it's you folks are stewards at the college, are stewards of this land. And an indicator species for good, healthy forest habitat is the wood thrush. Now, whether you know this species or not, and I don't have sound on this, so I wish I could play you the beautiful song of the wood thrush. But the wood thrush is a species that nests in the understory. So we see its nest in this picture on the right-hand side of the screen. They make their nets very similar to that of a robin's nest, except they use a lot more leaves in the construction, which helps to camouflage it. The wood thrush is actually a neotropical migrant species, meaning that they breed here, but then they spend their winters in the tropics. A lot of neotropical species have dropped like a stone in their population. In the last 50 years, wood thrush has dropped 50% in population. So habitat that attracts these birds, like the Kirkland Woods, are all the more important because of that population drop. Here's a similar species, a related species called the hermit thrush. They also like similar forest land, but they're often pushed out by wood thrushes that outcompete them. These guys tend to gravitate more towards cool hemlock woods. They're more common in the Adirondacks and the Adirondack foothills these days. They used to nest in the Kirkland Woods in the gorges, but not so much anymore. Their song is similar to the wood thrush, but it starts with a single clear note with each phrase. Scarlet tanager. Now here we see, unlike with the wood thrushes and the hermit thrush, these guys show sexual dimorphism, which is pretty dramatic. I mean, the female and the male look quite different. The male with the brilliant scarlet plumage and the breeding plumage, and the female drabber, but still very pretty. And just so when she sits on her nest, she's not like a ridiculous red light sitting there saying the nest is over here. Usually when people come to our nature sanctuary, this is the bird they want to see. And I'm not always able to show that to them because they tend to be in the canopy. So you can always hear them though. Their song is similar to a robin. It's a caroling song with a burry quality to it. So you can usually hear them, but seeing them is sometimes a trick. I remember once in the Kirkland Woods during the breeding season, seeing what I call a tanager tornado. It was a bunch of male tanagers were fighting over the same territory, and they swirled in front of me. It was pretty amazing. Best kind of tornado to experience. This is one of the woodpeckers, which sounds like it has an insult for a name. It's a yellow-bellied sapsucker. The male has the red under the throat, and the female lacks that feature. These guys are inhabitants of mature forests mostly. They will accept forests of what we call lower quality, but they do best in a large in an older woods where there's larger diameter trees. And that's true of most of the woodpeckers. These guys, unlike most other woodpeckers, make their living by drilling into living trees. As the name suggests, they like to suck the sap. So can you see that? There's little lines of holes in that tree. And they have their favorite tree species to drink from. This was, it looks like American mountain ash. And that has very tasty sap. So that's why. But occasionally they'll drill into hemlocks, basswoods they love. So they like a diverse range of tree species. One thing, when the forest came back to this region, the pileated woodpeckers came back. This is a crow-sized woodpecker that nests in older woods. They make very large tree cavities, which are used by them one year, and then the next year it might be used by a wood duck, or by a screech owl, or by gray squirrels, or by any number of species that need large tree cavities. We did not always have red-bellied woodpeckers in this region. They came through here. I remember seeing my first one in about 1981. And since then, they've really taken off. And they've come here because of the forest, essentially the forest recovering in this area. And they've done very well. Sometimes people call them ladderback woodpeckers because they have the zebra ladder-like pattern on the back, but that's not technically their name. They have a little patch of orange on their belly, which gives them the name red-bellied. The female has a gap in the red on top of her head, and that's how you tell her from the male. And they are, just like the other woodpeckers, are primary cavity builders, so they're like the contractors in the bird world. They make tree cavities, which are then utilized by other birds. This bird was actually not excavating this hole, but he was evicting a red squirrel that had moved in and had brought all this nest material inside, and he was like taking it all out bunch by bunch. Downy woodpeckers. This is a mature male with the red on the back of the head, and an immature male with the red on the top of his head. And then this is a similar kind of the doppelganger species, the hairy woodpecker, that's a size larger. Both very common in the woods. Now getting to the birds that really first ignited my interest in birds, the warblers. And these two guys nest in the Kirkland woods. I'm reasonably sure he still does. I'm not positive that this guy still does. This is the Blackburnian warbler, sometimes called the friar throat. And this is the black-throated green warbler. These guys nest in similar habitat to the hermit thrush. They like the cool hemlock woods, but these guys tend to nest more in the canopy. These guys are canopy nesters too. They will accept hemlocks, but they usually prefer spruce trees. Again, wonderful woodland warblers. Conservation notes on this guy. Population has increased with the Blackburnian warbler, which is interesting because with most neotropicals, the numbers have gone down. Regionally, though, they say that the black-throated green numbers are stable, but I've noticed a regional decline. We used to have them breeding at our nature preserve, and now they're hard to come by. Hooded warblers are kind of they're a trademark bird in the Kirkland woods. It wasn't always this way. When I first noted them in the mid 1990s, I reported it to the New York State Ornithological Association, and they told me that that was the furthest north they knew of a colony. So it was pretty exciting. Since then, the hooded warblers have continued to move northward. They're not doing great though. They're subject to the same problems, mostly climate change related, habitat loss that other birds, especially neotropicals, are subject to. So the regional populations have declined here and there. This is a bit less common species that also is an understory nester, like the hooded warbler. This guy is called the mourning warbler. And here we see an adult male and an immature, which does not have the hood. These guys also nest on or near the ground. You're finding that this is a common theme. A lot of these birds nest on or near the ground, which tells you this is a good reason not to go off trail when you walk in the Kirkland Woods, because you could very easily step on one of these nests. Another species that used to nest in the Kirkland Woods and in some of the forest land around here is the black-throated blue warbler. Here we see dramatic sexual dimorphism, the male with the blue and the female, completely different look about it. She even has like an eye stripe that the male lacks. They both have this little handkerchief patch though. But originally, early ornithologists thought that they belonged to two different species. Very common in the Kirkland Woods and in other mature forest habitat is the ovenbird. And you usually know when the ovenbird's around because they're the one that goes, teacher, 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 teacher. They're always looking for the teacher, which seems appropriate at a college. They nest on the ground as well. Their nest was said to resemble a Dutch oven. Does anybody know what a Dutch oven looks like? And that's why they were named the ovenbird, but it's kind of like a covered top. So it's not just an open nest. It has like a little canopy over it. But that's definitely a good bird, and they seem to be doing relatively well. Isn't my mouse working? Yeah, there we go. This is a similar looking species called the Louisiana water thrush. Conservation notes tell us that this species is gone up in population in the last 50 years, but locally, like some of the other ones I've talked about, their population has definitely gone down. At Sherrill Brook Park in New Hartford, I used to find quite a few of these breeding in the gorge, and they were breeding in the Kirkland Woods Gorge too. But in more recent years, I have a hard time finding them. Their nest is very interesting. Again, they usually nest at the bottom of an upturned tree. So that just shows you, tree falls over, it makes habitat for somebody. And it makes habitat for birds like winter wrens, but also for the Louisiana water thrush. But what's interesting about their nest is they have a nest similar to the ovenbird, but then it has this runway made of leaves, which often leads to the creek. And the water thrush likes to get its prey from the water or near the water. They also have a great song too. The Louisiana water thrush starts its song with this swooping whistle, like 3 swooping whistles, and then it descends into kind of a jumble of notes. Speaking of a jumble of notes, the winter wren, this tiny little guy, this mousy guy that hops around on the forest floor, they like the gorges around the Kirkland Woods, but they also nest in woodland swamps, relatively old standing trees around woodland swamps. They also like it when a tree topples over and they build their nest in the matrix of roots in the pulled out root system. Great bird. This guy, the red-eyed vireo, used to be the most commonly encountered bird in the Kirkland Woods, and you'd hear them singing, unlike a lot of birds, which will sing for just a few hours in the morning, maybe up until 8 or 10 o'clock when brunch is ready. But these guys would sing all the way through, like right through noon into the afternoon with this monotonous song. It sounds like they're saying vireo, 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 vireo. Yes, we know you're there, we know. But these guys are one of the finest nest builders we have, very similar to how the oriole constructs its nest, attaching the nest to the rim, by the rim of the nest to the branch, and then the nest is like a basket. I've watched them create their nests. They use like grass, they use rootlets, but they also use a lot of spider silk. And so their nest is incredibly elastic. And if you've seen that, the female actually forms the inner contours of the nest with her chest, pressing herself against the nest to form the cup. It's pretty amazing. Sometimes the male incubates, which isn't always true with birds. And he can't stop himself from singing while he's incubating, which is not a good plan. Because it's like you're supposed to be, concealing the nest and not telling everybody where it is. One of the reasons why their numbers went down is because brown-headed cowbirds, which came to the east after the forest was cleared. They actually lived in the plain states, and they followed the buffalo around, and the buffalo would kick up, seeds, and that's what the cowbird would eat. And the cowbirds developed this habit of laying their eggs in other songbirds' nests so that they'd farm out raising their young to other birds so they could continue to be transients. Well, when the eastern forest was cleared, the cowbirds came in here and they started laying their eggs in the eastern songbirds' nests. The eastern songbirds didn't evolve with cowbirds. And so they accepted readily those cowbirds' eggs and raised those chicks at the detriment of their own young. So here we see a hooded warbler, which is raising this big cowbird, which is about, a third again larger than him. And sometimes what happens is happens year after year, and then the native birds don't nest anymore because they lose the history of even using it as a territory. That's what happened to the blue-headed vireo, which used to nest in the Kirkland Woods 25 years ago. The last time I saw one, it was raising a cowbird, and after that, they didn't come anymore. But that's a great bird. You could still find them in the foothills of the Adirondacks pretty readily in some of the large parcels of state land in Oneida and Madison County. Wonderful singer. Unlike the red-eyed vireo, they have a short song too, but it's much greater range. So it's like a red-eyed vireo that has taken a lot of voice lessons. And the black-capped chickadee, most of us know from our bird feeders, they are a forest bird though. And unlike a lot of small forest birds, they are capable of excavating their own nest. They do it not in the same way woodpeckers do it by pounding it out. They find a more rotten snag, and then they pull out little bits of sawdust, just mouthful at a time. And here's a picture of one of their nests, and it's a beautiful, just wonderfully comfortable. If you had to be raised in a bird's nest, this would be the one. It's like this mattress of soft moss and then animal hair, painstakingly collected. And it's just huge too. It's a huge nest. It fills the entire cavity, unlike a lot of other birds' nests. It's a very similar thing, cavity nester, the white-breasted nuthatch. That's actually a female that has the blue-gray cap on the top of its head, and they were nesting in this hemlock tree. The tufted titmouse, similar story to the red-bellied woodpecker. They were not here originally. They came in, they moved in the early 80s, almost hand in hand with the red-bellied woodpecker, and now they are a very common bird. Cavity nesters, they sometimes use bluebird boxes. Fairly common in the Kirkland Woods and in some of the healthier parcels of mature forest in the area is a rose-breasted grosbeak. A lot of us know him because they come to bird feeders, especially obvious in May when they first come back from migration. They are to a neotropical songbird. The sexual dimorphism, very dramatic in this species. Would you know that they're the same species with this dramatic difference between the male with his rose breast and the female with her kind of Egyptian looking face and her wonderful eyeline? Very beautiful bird. There's another case where the male sometimes incubates, and he's got the good sense to incubate low in the nest so you don't see his ruby chest, although you do see his white spots on his tail. They typically will choose a younger tree to nest in, too, in an older forest, which is an interesting habit. How many of you see cuckoos in this area? There's actually two species of cuckoo that we have. This is the yellow-billed. The yellow-billed likes to nest in forest situations, while the black-bill tends to nest in more open areas. These guys can sometimes be fairly common in years that we have outbreaks of tent caterpillars, because unlike a lot of other birds, they are able to digest the tent caterpillars with their stinging hairs. We also have a number of raptors which utilize mature forest habitat, including the great horned owl. Unfortunately, great horned owl numbers have come down quite a bit in the last 20 years. And originally, about 12 years ago or so, they started coming down with West Nile. And that proved to be a pretty severe limiting factor for the population locally. The only reason I know this is because I work with wildlife rehabilitators often, and they would tell me that got in another great horned owl with West Nile. And mostly they didn't survive. But as they lost ground, as they lost territory, another woodland species gained. Barred owls became incredibly common. And so now the most common owl you'll find in the woods is probably the barred owl. And barred owls also, unlike a lot of other owl species, they can be active, fairly active during the day. So they're not strictly nocturnal. More nocturnal is the screech owl. And the screech owl is one that benefits from the pileated woodpecker, making the nice big tree cavities. They're, as I say, they're fairly nocturnal. So if you don't see them, I'm not surprised. Occasionally you'll see one. Actually, Ernest, I think you were with me when we took the picture of that guy. That was at Andrew's house, right? Oh, it was at your house. Okay. Remember if it's your house or next door. What, is he still coming around? We also have a few other owl species that nobody ever sees, or practically no one ever does. This is the long-eared owl. It's the best picture I could get of this guy. They typically live in forest habitat, but once in a while you'll see them in kind of more prairie habitat situations. The saw-whet owl, this guy's only about 7 inches tall. It's just a little guy, songbird size. And they require mature forest habitat. And you don't find them unless you really have a good piece of contiguous forested habitat that's relatively mature. A raptor that's similar to the red-tailed hawk, but likes forest habitat and to breed in the forest is the broad-winged hawk. These are immature seen here. The mature bird has a very obviously striped black and white tail. Wonderful bird. We see, let me show you its nest. This is one sitting on a nest in one of our sugar maple trees, pretty high up. He wasn't too happy when I came around. Most of you know this guy is the bird feeder hawk. This is a Cooper's hawk. Cooper's hawk typically nest in forest situations. They build wonderful stick nests. They're not so married to the forest. They might breed, have their nest in the forest, but then they will hunt the suburbs. They'll have a circuit of bird feeders that they will visit, trying to catch the birds by surprise and grab a mourning dove or something else. In the Kirkland woods, we once had a species called the northern goshawk that bred here. They are now one of the rarest raptors in the state and really in the Northeast. It's a beautiful bird. It's like a bigger version of the Cooper's hawk, a little bit different plumage too. The last one that bred in the Kirkland woods was in the late 90s. I didn't see it myself. It was before I ever went into the Kirkland woods, but I heard reports of people who were attacked by it because they're very aggressive around their nest site and they'll swoop down and they'll sometimes strike you. I mean, they're not going to hurt you. They might take your hat off, which I would worry about, especially if they flew away with it. But they still do nest in some other areas, like in the Adirondack foothills, the Adirondacks, and possibly some parcels of state land. They're very hard to come by now. Unfortunately, the last pair that nested in the Kirkland woods had a sad end. There was a professor who used to come to work through the college, and he didn't like being swooped on by this bird. And he actually brought a stick with him and broke the bird's wing. And so that was the last time that these guys nested here. So unfortunately, that one action by one individual meant that we would no longer have goshawks in the area. So it shows you how sensitive the issue of conservation can be, how pivotal an action one person can have. Other warbler species, woodland warblers, we call them, sometimes show up during migration. These are two beautiful species called the Cape May warbler, which was incredibly common for the first time ever last spring. For some reason, we had a glut of them migrating through. And this gorgeous guy called the northern parula. Well, these guys mostly nest in Canada and maybe, you know, once in a while in the high Adirondacks. These guys can be found pretty readily in the Adirondack foothills and the Adirondacks as regular nesting species. Black and white warblers are another species which breeds in forests in the region, although to my knowledge, never in the Kirkland woods. Some woods, especially around the sand plains in Rome, they really like that type of habitat. These guys used to nest in the Kirkland woods, and I'm not really sure what happened to them. It's a myrtle warbler. They like that grove of Norway spruce. And they would nest in there high up towards the tops of the trees. The magnolia warbler, to my knowledge, never did nest around here, but they do nest pretty readily in the larger parcels of state land around here, also in Norway spruce. Sometimes I get irritated when I hear, you know, the DEC talking about, you know, taking out all the Norway spruce in the state land parcels, because that's where a lot of the Blackburnians and magnolia warblers are nesting. They don't care that they're native. They don't care. It's an analog to them. It might as well be, you know, white spruce, which is a native. We have some flycatchers that nest here regularly. This is the great crested flycatcher. It's poking out of a nest box, which has a plaintive whistle, as it's called. The only one that nests in tree cavities. And this is the eastern wood pewee, which most of you, if you walk in the Kirkland woods, you know that bird's song. It has a whistled, swooping pewee. And they sing pretty late into the summer too, so we always know that they're still around. I want to talk a little bit about edge habitat. Now that's a habitat that's a transition between either a meadow or a wetland or a prairie into a forest. So this habitat has its own cast of characters. One of my favorites is the chestnut-sided warbler. And gorgeous bird. I just show the male in this picture. I don't have a shot of the female here. But they nest on the ground again. So watch where you step, folks. Also, looking like a miniature oriole is the American redstart, male and female. We see strong sexual dimorphism. Once again, early ornithologists thought they were a different species because of that dramatic difference. Also an edge habitat and you know, suburban situations and prairie type habitat, you'll find the gray catbird. It's a very skilled mimic, mimics the songs of other birds. Their eggs look a lot like robin's eggs because they're related. It's sometimes called mimic thrushes, and a robin is a thrush. See that? But their nests are usually oversized, and sometimes you'll find one that's as large as like a hubcap, and you're wondering what they were thinking. The bandit bird, also known as the common yellowthroat, because of that face mask, also nests in situations like that, edge situations. Beautiful nest, very skilled nest builder. Most people also, when they come to the sanctuary, they want to see this bird, the indigo bunting. Indigo bunting will come to bird feeders, especially when they first come back in May. Again, a neotropical species, and a species with very strong difference between male and female plumage. You wouldn't know it was the same species. These guys, their population is doing relatively well, meaning they've only lost 28% in the last 50 years. So unfortunately, we have to look upon that sometimes as not doing too badly. But you could still come upon them in prairie situations and in edge habitat. Helps if you know their song, which isn't the strongest song to hear. It's not like full-throated. Of course, the American robin, probably don't need to say much about that, except for these guys, during the course of time that I've been active in surveying birds and being a birder, these guys decided that they would nest in the forest all of a sudden. I don't know how common this is across the country, but now I can find them in the heart of a forest competing with wood thrushes for territory. And that was not the case back in the early 90s. So I just find that very interesting. We also have a woodland chicken, which nests in edge habitat. Usually they nest kind of in the edge, and then they will feed in prairie type situations, sometimes in the woods. It's called the ruffed grouse. And why are they called ruffed? Because they rough up their neck feathers when they're displaying. Here's a picture of a nest I found on the ground. You see a couple eggs. I included this picture of its toes because you see these interesting projections along the sides of its toes. They're called pectinations. And they develop those only for the winter, and that helps them walk on top of the snow. It just helps distribute their weight, so they're more efficient about snow walking. And very excitingly, we have turkeys. And we didn't have turkeys around here when I was a kid. They were reintroduced here in the 70s into the state, and they've done really well. In the 90s, they really exploded, and we had huge populations everywhere. But now, since a lot of mammalian predators like coyotes and fishers are back, which makes it makes the habitat more healthy. That's a good thing. But they brought the turkey numbers down to size more. But it's wonderful still to see these dramatic birds with these tremendous displays just in our neighborhoods. Prairie habitat. Now, prairie habitat tends to be very rare because it's habitat in transition. That means you leave a field fallow for a while, you have early successional growth come in, young pioneer trees they're called, and that is evolving into forests. So if you wait, in some cases, just wait 10 years, it's not prairie anymore. So the birds that utilize this type of habitat are gonna have to move at some point, right? It's not a permanent situation. This is the blue-winged warbler, which was not here 50 years ago, but moved in from the south and took over habitat from another species that used prairie habitat. This was the golden-winged warbler. So if you were here, say, 50 years ago, you'd be finding these guys and not so much the blue-winged. They're very closely related, so they interbreed. And when they interbreed, they essentially create hybrids. And I'll show you what the hybrid looks like. So it looks like, combination between the two species. But over a period of years around here, the blue-wing just swamped out the golden-wings. So we no longer have any of those gorgeous golden-winged warblers left. Oops. And this one, actually the one here, this guy was the last one I know of that bred in the region. And it was at our nature preserve. It was back in 2005. And the last years he was here, he came for 5 years in a row, the same individual. I recognized his song. He was breeding with Brewster's warblers, the hybrid. He was breeding with blue wings. He couldn't find a mate that was a golden wing. So it was a very sad story. But inside of every blue-winged warbler, there's a little bit of golden-winged warblers. Another wonderful prairie bird is the brown thrasher, which has one of the greatest songs. And its song is not its own song. It's a mimic, just like the catbird. And it's a very skilled mimic that can mimic many different species, which it gives its impersonations in a chain. And so you hear one, it's doing a flicker, it's doing a robin, it's doing a red-eyed vireo. You could recognize the songs that he's put into his repertoire. And the bluebird, the eastern bluebird, is another success story, really, with the people starting bluebird box trails and putting bluebird boxes all over the place, and the recovery of the beaver in the area has led to a lot more nesting opportunities for bluebirds. They originally lost out because they didn't have the tree cavities. And then they're also competing for tree cavities with non-native European starlings and house sparrows. But a magic thing happens if you put a bird box up in a prairie or in a field, bluebirds might move in. And this is what a fledgling bluebird looks like, quite a bit different than the parents. Beautiful eggs of the bluebird inside the box. Another one of my absolute favorites in prairie type habitat is the eastern towhee. And we see sexual dimorphism again, with the female has the brown pad, the male with the black. And they usually nest on or near the ground. And they can be fairly common in prairie habitat, but you leave and you go to a different habitat type and you just don't have them. And the American goldfinch, which most of us know from our bird feeders, are also prairie nesting species. And here we see a female collecting thistledown, which she will use to make her nest. They have a close association with thistles. This is actually non-native thistle too, called Canada thistle. And it provides food, the thistle seed, but it also, this fluff, these parachutes, which are wonderful nest material. And here we see the male in the thistle and a really well-made goldfinch nest. This is called a field sparrow, and they've dropped in population by 69% over the last 50 years. And that is due mostly to the fact that their habitat, prairie habitat, is so rare. We have a lot of it at the nature sanctuary, so they're a fairly common nesting species with us, I'm glad to say. Song sparrow has become one of the most common birds in prairie situations, and in some edge type habitat too, they could be very abundant. Again, they nest on the ground, another species that nests on the ground. This is a rare species for our area, but we did have them as a nesting species for about 5 years at the sanctuary. The only place known where they were known to nest at this time in the county. This is called a clay-colored sparrow. That has a song, a buzzy song, very similar to that of the blue-winged warbler and the golden-winged warbler. The red-tailed hawk, which is a hunter of prairies and swamps, but it usually puts its nest in the woods or at the wooded edge. And we're going to go into grassland birds a little bit, but honestly, I don't have many pictures of grassland birds because I used to do video for years. And during the period I was going to grasslands, it was only video I was doing. So I didn't end up with any pictures. And now there's almost no grasslands. Almost all of it has been converted to row crops, to corn and soybean production. And that is just about exclusively in this region. All of that goes to animal agriculture. So you could say that, you know, we've lost our prairie birds to cows. It's pretty sad because it's some of our most spectacular birds, including the bobolink, which was a common nesting species around here. One problem too is, you know, people have hay fields around here still, but they mow the hay fields very early. And when they mow them, they destroy the nests, and then the birds just don't come back to nest the next year. So you lose that cultural memory of the species to continue to breed here. Oh, I'm sorry. We want to point out sexual dimorphism again. It's a female on this side, the male that looks a bit like an English judge with the white on the back of the head, like the white wig. The meadowlark, the one with the yellow, has become incredibly rare. I think I know of just one place in the county where you could still find meadowlarks. During the period of time when this was mostly hayfields, they were an incredibly common species, and now they've become very, very rare. Beautiful song too, the meadowlark, this kind of low descending whistle, just very distinctive. And this is the savanna sparrow, which was very common in the area until about 10 years ago. And now their numbers are declining, and I rarely find them now. Nesting on the borders of fields and prairies in wet spots is utilizing wet spots for foraging. That is, this is the snipe, the common snipe, or Wilson snipe it's called, with this tremendously long, crazy looking bill. And these guys have also become very rare because their habitat has disappeared. I see them during migration sometimes, but not usually during the breeding season. The marsh hawk, now called the harrier. This is a female that we have strong sexual dimorphism in this species as well. The female tends to be browner, while the male is almost gull-like. He's white and gray colored. They hunt the prairies and wetlands, but they typically make their nest in fields. So these guys have become very rare nesters, maybe not quite as rare as the goshawk, but pretty rare. This one was playing with a crow. I actually watched this girl play with this crow for about an hour, and they were just testing each other and using each other as sparring partners. It was pretty interesting. Harrier was a little bit bigger. We're running out of time. I didn't budget my time very well, but let me just go through at least a few of the wetland species. And Krista, are you still here? I'm not sure where she is. I'm hoping we could do a few questions before, but I want to go into wetlands. Now, wetlands, when I say wetlands, I'm saying a lot. We're getting pretty late. Can I go a little bit longer? Okay. Wetlands come in a lot of different forms. I mean, marshland, which is like an open area with a lot of cattail beds. You could have a woodland swamp, which has a lot of standing timber. There's beaver ponds, which I mentioned already. There's riparian systems, a system with a stream, a river going through it, or you could have a bog, like a boreal bog in the Adirondacks. So when you say wetlands, and there's more, you're really talking about a lot of stuff. We're going to blast through this. This is the great blue heron, which is very common. If you're lucky, you'll find a rookery. There used to be a few around here. There was a small one in Verona I used to visit. I'm not sure if it's still active, but they're spectacular places to see. Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge has some really nice heron rookeries. And here's the heron with its adult-sized young, which they have to put their bill inside the bill of their young and regurgitate to feed them. Here you might think you're looking at a scene from Florida. This was actually in Rome. This was Lake Delta Lake, sorry. And this was a collection of great egrets that were gathered on the mudflats. As the water level go down, as they draw it down, Lake Delta to feed the canal mostly, it would strand a lot of fish. And so when the fish would get stranded, all these wading birds would come in, and these migrant egrets came in. I think there were more than 30 of them that I saw that day. It was very impressive. And here's a close look at an egret at our beaver pond. These guys almost went extinct because of the plume trade, which took place in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And was only stopped really by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act being passed in 1918, which granted them protection in the nick of time, because we almost lost this as a species. Smaller heron species is the green heron, which is about the size of a crow, gorgeous bird, which inhabits beaver ponds. Not really colony nesters usually, like the great blue, nest in single situations. The American bittern, which prefers cattail marshes, which is a bit more common than I think we believe it is, because they're so secretive and they blend in with their habitat so well. Here's another rare guy. This is a songbird-sized bittern called the least bittern, aptly named. And if you get an idea of the size of this guy from the head of this Canada goose here, I mean, look at how small he is. And they depend on cattail marshes for breeding habitat. Although some people say that they've seen them nest in Phragmites, which is an invasive non-native species which takes over wetlands. They definitely prefer cattail marshes. So they still nest in the Utica Marsh, I'm glad to say. So if you want to see them, you might actually hear them and not see them. They have a song that's similar to the black-billed cuckoo. it's kind of a coo. So if you hear that, and it's only like one repetition and not coo, over and over again, that would be the black-billed cuckoo. Then you know you're hearing the least bittern. Also, one of the little wetland chickens we have is a rail species called the Virginia rail. These guys have tremendously long toes, which enable them to walk on top of emergent vegetation in the marsh. So it looks like they're literally walking on water sometimes, which is true from another wetland chicken species. This guy is called the coot. I'm sorry, the common gallinule, related to the coot. We also have coots and they look similar. These guys have tremendously long toes. They also do something very impressive. They create a nest which floats. They tether their nest to the shore. And so this nest can rise and fall with the water level in a wetland, which is very important because, you know, especially in spring, you have fluctuating water levels. The pied-billed grebe, this little guy who used to be turned into earmuffs for your winter pleasure. It's a very small grebe species. Grebes are similar to like mini loons, really. They're fish eaters generally, but they also make nests that are tethered to the shore and that go up and down with the water level. This is a related species, which is only a migrant here, called the horned grebe. And Canada geese, when I was a child, Canada geese were only migrants in this area. I'd see them flying over, but I never found their nests anywhere. But now their nests are everywhere, pretty much wherever there's a wetland. Our beaver ponds always host a lot of, well, not a lot because they're very territorial, you know, but they will host each pond in the beaver pond system will have its own Canada goose family. And here's a thanking their local beaver for creating habitat. And here we see a beaver standing, a goose standing on top of a beaver dam, showing their relationship. Black ducks used to be the common nesting species in the region for ducks, for dabbling ducks. Now it's the mallard. Mallards have kind of replaced the black duck. You could still find the black duck in the Adirondacks and during migration periods. This gorgeous guy too over here. It's kind of a, was it working? It's really hard to see. This is called the blue-winged teal, which actually does have blue patches on its wings, which you don't see, but it has that beautiful crescent moon shape on its face. And they still do nest in the region. This crazy looking guy, not a very good picture, but I wanted to show you this bird with this tremendously crazy bill. That's the northern shoveler. It has that very long bill, very specialized for straining its food out of the muck. One of our favorite ducks and one of the most beautiful in the region is the wood duck, which owes a lot to beavers. As the beaver population has increased, so has the wood duck population. We see the difference between male and female plumage here. They are tree nesting species, so they nest often in old woodpecker nests or in man-made boxes. This is an interesting looking fellow. Not a fellow though. This was a female wood duck that was at our pond this past year. And look at that plumage. It's like got this hybrid of male and female plumage. Never saw a bird like this before. Just thought I'd include that picture. Here's a comparison between it and a typical morph male wood duck. We also have these wonderful guys called mergansers, which in the wintertime can be found in rivers and streams in the area. And they will often go to ponds and lakes to breed. They also, like the wood duck, they like cavities to nest in. And we see the difference between the male and female. These guys are, like their name suggests, relatively common. They're large ducks, though, not as large as like a goose, but approaching that size. But there's a mini version. And these guys are just coming back right now. I'm just starting to see them come back to the beaver ponds. These are called hooded mergansers. The male has this beautiful crest, which it erects when he's around a female. That's the female. And there's the female has that crazy spiked hair look about her head feathers. Another teal similar to the blue-winged teal is the green-winged teal, only a migrant in this area, but they appreciate beaver land, beaver habitat, as well as open marsh. Some small birds you could find nesting in the Utica marsh include the marsh wren, which has this wonderful rattle-like song, which is very distinctive. And the swamp sparrow. The swamp sparrow, unlike other sparrows, has relatively long legs, and that allows it to wade in the water to relatively deep water for its food, which is something other sparrows can't do so well. Their song is a very simple trill, which is similar to that of a junco or a chipping sparrow. And we're very fortunate to have large raptors in our wetlands, like bald eagles. If you went back to the 70s, I think early 70s, I think there was one nesting pair of bald eagles in the state. Their numbers were decimated by DDT in the 1960s, and they all disappeared from the wild around these parts, around the state. And luckily, the recovery was great. They still have some conservation challenges, though. Right now, they're having a problem. They're falling prey to avian influenza, but they also, during the winter, often they'll eat carrion. So they'll eat dead animals that they find, and they're sometimes being poisoned by lead, because people will shoot a deer using lead shot, and then the bald eagles will ingest that lead shot, and it will poison them. And unsurprisingly, a lot of the bald eagles that are brought into rehabilitators for different reasons, maybe for a broken wing, it'll be found that they have a large amount of lead in their systems. So something to do is to get the lead out. So if we could convince hunters not to use lead shot, that would be really great. Osprey have a similar story to the bald eagle in that they were decimated by DDT, which caused eggshell thinning. And when they would go to incubate their eggs, they would just smash them. And so they disappeared completely from the state. But now their numbers are really good. And we see them in just about every wetland hunting. Also, the belted kingfisher, which is a great friend of beaver habitat and wetlands in general. Fish eaters, they often nest in cavities dug in the side of a bank. So they'll nest in like a cave. And occasionally I've seen them come in and out of their caves. It's a pretty cool thing to see. In the case of the kingfisher too, the belted kingfisher, the female has more ornate plumage than the male. She has the red in the front, where the male lacks that. And just a couple more, and then I guess we'll take a few questions. The blue-gray gnatcatcher is a small songbird that makes a gorgeous nest that nests at the Utica Marsh. Their nest looks a lot like a hummingbird nest. I'm not sure if you've ever seen one, but they sit on top of a lateral branch, and it's decorated but with lichen. And so it blends in and looks just like a knot on a tree branch. It's a really beautiful structure. And this is the yellow-throated vireo, yet another vireo species in our region. And this one I almost never found them like 30 years ago, but now in wetland areas around here, you could hear their song. Their song has a burry quality to it, which, as I say, it sounds a bit like a red-eyed vireo song, but with a harsher quality, like a tanager quality to it. And just do a couple more. This is the eastern kingbird, which is almost always found in wetlands around this area. Their nest looks like it could use a haircut. It's a very kind of wild-looking nest. They often nest right above the water. And there's good reason for that, because a lot of predators are not going to cross the water, climb the tree, and get to the nest. So that's a smart bird. The black-billed cuckoo, which I mentioned earlier, they tend to nest around riparian systems. Not always, but often. And like the yellow-billed cuckoo, they seek out tent caterpillars. So in years that we have a large amount of tent caterpillars. We have a bad outbreak. These guys tend to be a little bit more common. Their nests are they're not good nest builders. You could use, if you look from underneath a cuckoo nest, you could see right through it and count the eggs. So usually 1 or 2 eggs, they don't have a lot of young. The yellow warbler, also associated with wetland situations, often nesting about mid-levels in willows and poplar trees, known for their sprightly songs. Beautiful nest, often using a lot of white plant fibers to build their nest. That's the female, by the way. She lacks the orange striping the male has in the front. Warbling vireo, another vireo species that inhabits wetland situations. Their song sounds a lot like that of a purple finch or a house finch. It's a complicated warble, except it's very evenly metered. So I could always tell a warbling vireo from a purple finch. Also, the habitat is different usually. And of course, the Baltimore oriole, which very often places its wonderful basket woven nest above the water. And let me show, this is the female, by the way. She's usually a bit duller than the male. And this is what her nest looks like. The female only builds the nest too. The male has nothing to do with it. He defends the area, so maybe, and stops by and offers advice, I think. But he's not a construction guy. But sometimes you'll see them and they'll have a long neck to the basket, and that helps ensure that you don't get a nest predator in. And consequently, remember I was telling you about the cowbirds earlier, how they lay their eggs in other songbirds' nests. They don't tend to do it with orioles. I've rarely seen an oriole be a host to a cowbird chick. That's because of that nest design. And tree swallows almost only would nest in wetland situations until they're cavity nesters. So they'd nest in dead trees, you know, in cavities pounded up by woodpeckers. But when the bluebird thing got really going and bluebird conservation was all the rage and people were putting up bluebird nest box trails, the tree swallows took advantage of it. And so they nest in like 60% of the boxes in our bluebird trails. So, which is good. It's a wonderful species. Their nest is gorgeous. They'll add duck feathers as ornaments, you know, to their nest. I mean, there's no real structural importance to adding these feathers on top. It's just they have a bit of panache, you know. Are very rare species of woodpecker, but was once one of the most common woodpeckers in this area is the red-headed woodpecker. Now, these guys lost out because the myriad of different reasons, but the habitat changed, beaver ponds disappeared, lots of different reasons. Also, some say because they swoop so low, you know, they would be hit by cars, you know, when they would nest in trees along roadsides. But they still do nest in some swamps in the region, and Verona, you could still occasionally find them. Gorgeous species, though. Okay, we're going to probably stop at this guy and maybe just take a couple questions if we have some time. I wanted to get to urban nesting species too, but I'm too long-winded about each of these birds. Or I should have included less birds. I'm a completist, though. You know, it's very difficult for me to say, well, I'm not going to talk about the flicker today. The flickers are one of the most fun birds in the area to watch. Their nesting behavior is pretty interesting. This is the male that has the black mustache here. These are two nestlings, one standing on top of probably 3 others inside the nest cavity, the most aggressive one waiting for the parent to come back with food. They're hilarious to watch too after they fledge because they'll play together. They'll chase each other around the trunk of a tree. They act a lot more like corvids, almost like ravens and crows in their behavior around the nest. So let's stop there and just take a few questions. Krista, do we have time for any questions?
questions. There was one on the Zoom that I thought I'd start with because it has to do with riparian. Are there any cranes in the area?
Only as migrants. They do, however, there is a nesting population out in Montezuma, and it's the sandhill crane, obviously the more common species. Occasionally they do migrate over, and they could be sometimes heard because their call is very distinctive. So we'll hear it and we'll run to see if we could see them flying over. I had a few fly over me a couple of years ago in spring. It was very exciting. There's a few other spots here and there around the state where you could find them nesting. Yes, Ernest.
Yeah, well done, Matt. Nice job. I just wanted to point out that many of these species can be seen on the Kirkland Trail, where the Kirkland Trail is. And I will add, actually, there's Savannah sparrows there about every May.
Oh, good. That's good to hear. Is it a hayfield that they're nesting in?
Field just north of Dugway Road.
Okay.
That field.
Okay, so you have a lot of edge habitat, you have a riparian,
There's wetland.
you have grassland, so that's a good mix. Yeah. Dugway Road historically was a wonderful place for birds. That was the last place in the region that we had cerulean warblers nesting. I mean, now cerulean warblers, the only place I know of that you could find them. For a while, you could find some in Verona. This is a species of warbler, blue, beautiful canopy nesting species. You could find them at Howland Island, which is part of the Montezuma complex, and that's the most reliable place for the species. Otherwise, that species has really crashed. Yes, over here.
In the last couple of years, we've noticed a great number of vultures, black-faced and red, big turkey vultures.
What area?
In our backyard.
Where? Clinton?
In Clinton.
Okay.
In the village.
William Street.
On William Street. I mean, I'm used to seeing them circling overhead, but I've never had them come so close. And part of the reason is they sit on the roof ridges of buildings because it's warm.
Yeah.
But they're still in much closer proximity than I've ever seen.
I've noticed Clinton has a very healthy population of turkey vultures. However, you are starting to get some black vultures. They literally just moved in. I just started seeing them this past year in Clinton. Maybe somebody else has seen them before, but it's possible that they will start, they're non-migratory too. So if you get black vultures, they'll stay through the winter. Most of our turkey vultures leave. We do occasionally have some that will spend the winter. Why they like Clinton so much now? I have a couple of theories. I think that the town may dispose of roadkill deer in a certain spot behind the municipal building. And I think that brings in the turkey vultures. But also they appreciate, towns because, as you said, towns are warmer. That's one of the reasons I was going to go into a whole section about urban areas and urban habitat. And one of the reasons that urban areas are popular with birds is because of the heat sink. It's warmer and it tends to be more amenable,
They seem a lot friendlier.
Are they shaking your hat? Well, we have a turkey vulture, which I call Dangles, because he has one leg that always dangles down when he flies, that I've seen for 8 years in a row. This will be his 9th year if he comes back, but he actually flies over us every day and say, "Hi, Dangles." Do you know Dangles?
No, but I guess my favorite bird.
Okay. It's a nice bird, as long as you don't get close to their nest, because their defense is to throw up on you if you get close to their nest. Not nice, because you consider what they eat. Yes.
Avian influenza, is it not discriminating to all bird species fall prey to?
So far, we're not seeing a lot of it in songbirds. We're mostly seeing it in raptors and waterfowl, and I believe in shorebirds. So it's really bad news, and it's taking out a lot of, I guess, along the coast, especially peregrine falcons, unfortunately. And as most of you know, I have a big interest in peregrine falcons because we have a nesting pair in Utica, which we recently lost our female. That has been, we had the same pair for 12 years, and she just died this year. And I wonder, was that avian influenza? I mean, obviously she's at least 15 years old. She could have died of natural causes. We don't know. But to answer your question, I mean, it has a potential of affecting all birds. But where we're seeing it though, most obviously is in raptors, some corvids, and in waterfowl shorebirds. And it's not good. It's bad news. Yes. Back, yes.
Can you comment on the policymaking, infrastructure, decision-making with respect to habitats? I'm raising the questions because of specific interest in the Ray Hill Trail, where all of the beaver were exterminated. The dam was cut out and the lake drained to become sort of affected. Becoming clays.
Well, who trapped out the beavers? Was it on private land or was it on municipal? Oh, you're talking about the Ray Hill Trail. Oh, okay. Yeah, I know about that situation. That was an illegal trapping that took place there.
Yeah.
That was illegal. That was on land owned by Bosse's and adjacent to land owned by New Hartford, and that was supposed to be posted land, and a trapper had come on and took it upon themselves to destroy that beaver habitat, which is really sad, but apparently was stopped and that land was posted. So hopefully it won't happen again. If you notice it happening, let us know. You could let me know and we could do something about it. But yeah, unfortunately, human beaver conflicts are big, and sometimes it's not somebody trapping just for the fur, they're trapping just to eliminate the beavers and what they perceive as a flooding problem. What we do in our group, Beavers, Wetlands Wildlife, we try to solve beaver-human conflicts. We advise people and municipalities to put in water flow devices, which are simple devices to install. You put them in the beaver dam that stops the beaver from being able to raise the water level to flood a driveway or flood a road or flood a path, but it saves the beaver habitat. So all the wonderful wildlife and the beaver wetland system ecology can remain, but you don't have the negative part. Do we have any more time for questions? Or one more question from the gallery? No more questions. Yeah, right here.
Can you tell us a little more about what you do at Spring Farm Cares?
I do habitat restoration work largely. I also do, I'd like to also study animal behavior. So, but in terms of restoration work, we've done reforestation. For the last 25 years, we've planted trees. So we're trying to grow forests that might be similar to what you would have come upon here 240 years ago, but not really, because a lot of the species that are constituents to our forests today can't live here anymore because of invasive diseases. We're losing our beech trees. We might lose our hemlock trees to blights. We lost our elm trees, so we have to be a bit more creative about the species makeup. But we have a beaver population, which we've had for 25 years. They're in charge of our wetland creation. And they have been responsible for bringing in a lot of species diversity, I'm happy to say. But we also do native wildflower restoration work. We try and preserve our prairie habitat. We don't have grasslands, but we do have, evolving forest. I really love to study beaver behavior, but I've also expanded to studying the behavior of other wildlife that live at the sanctuary, like our deer population. And I've studied peregrine falcon population now for since 2007. I think the first year we recognized there was a pair in downtown Utica. And we were the ones responsible for, along with the Kirkland Bird Club, of putting a nest box on the 15th floor of the Adirondack Bank building, which is where our current pair is nesting. And just so those of you know, it looks like Aries, the resident male, has accepted another female to at that nest site. So hopefully we will have a successful breeding year. She's not quite getting the idea yet about, she's young, she's not quite sure what to do. It's possible the timing is going to be off this year, but we've seen the mating. We've seen him giving her, not successfully though. We've seen him giving her food gifts. We've seen them doing flight displays, them doing ledge displays at the box. Currently, right now, I'm checking the nest because I can't help myself. It looks like he is at the box. Unless that's an old picture and I haven't refreshed my image. Yeah, so that's what I do pretty much. But thank you ever so much. It's wonderful to be back. I think this is my third time here. Yeah. Maybe I'll come back again and finish this. Maybe I'll come back again and finish this presentation. Thanks, folks.
And people wouldn't care, dude. Just most people would be happy to just keep going.
Yeah, I felt bad. I couldn't get through that. But thanks for coming. Hey, you. I haven't seen you in ages.
I know.
Where you been?
Good. I lost my David. He died of
Oh, sorry.
Alzheimer's. So that's why I haven't seen him. He was
Yeah.
kind of housebound for 5 years.
I know what that's like. Both my parents.
The Beaver organization, I'd like to be involved with it.
Okay.
And if you want to do some research, my camp is Beaver Lodge right in front.
Oh,
So it's a perfect place to,
So-
I see him every day.
they're not causing any problems for you?
Oh, yeah, they are. That's why I want to become
Oh,
involved,
okay.
because I was talking to the supervisor of Forest Corps and said, you know, there's solutions other than just killing these beavers,
they-
which they've been doing every year.
Yeah,
You know, it's
because
making me
you
sick.
know, when they do that, the beaver habitat is still there, so it continues to attract beavers.
Right.
And so all you're
If it
doing
becomes
is like,
vacant,
yeah.
they're just coming,
So-
more coming in. And I keep telling them that. I said, this isn't a viable solution, just shooting them every